Hello everyone, welcome to Lesson 10 Tutorials. My name is Tashif and today we're going to cover some basic introduction to Unix and the Unix shell. So this course is intended for beginners, primarily those who are familiar with Windows and want to migrate into Unix because of their job or maybe for like a hobby. So if you're looking for a more advanced video, feel free to tune into this channel or search YouTube. I'm pretty sure you'll find some more advanced tutorials on this. So what is Unix? Unix is an operating system and probably one of the oldest ones. It's fairly common nowadays. All the web servers or uh, Android based OSs, all of those have their base in the original Unix operating system. If you look at Wikipedia, what it says is Unix is a family of multi-user operating systems, um, and it was originally created by AT&T in collaboration with Bell Labs in 1970s. There are many more advanced or modern systems that are based on Unix, like the Solaris, the BSD, and lastly, the Apple's Mac OS, which is the most popular one. So you may not have known that Mac OS is actually based on Unix operating system. So on the right, you see this is the development tree of Unix. So in the early 1970s, this was the first version of Unix. And then from there were a lot of branching and new operating systems that came up. So all these yellow are actually mixed or shared source. The greens are the completely open source, uh, you know, distros, and the red ones are the closed source or the proprietary. So as you can see that many of these OSs like the Mac OS, this is partially open, and then there's a huge plethora of distros like the FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD. These are completely open, and there are a lot of closed source Unix based OSs like Sun OS and the Solaris, the HPUX. These are derivatives of the original Unix, and they are proprietary. Linux, on the other hand, is completely open source, and this was the fundamental ideology of the creators of Linux. Uh, you can say it's a sibling of Unix, however, it doesn't share the same kernel as the Unix. It was rewritten from scratch by someone called Linus Torvalds, sorry. Um, and this was first released in 1991, I guess. Oh, that was the public release, and in 1994 that was the version 1 Linux that was released. And as you can see, the Linux has a very high or very large user base, and till now there are probably more than 50 Linux distros that is there in the market. And whatever we learn today, even if we call it a Unix tutorial, it's applicable for Linux or Mac OS or any other Unix based operating systems because they share a very similar background on an environment. So what is a Unix operating system? So basically a Unix OS is made up of three parts: the kernel, the shell, and the programs. So what is the kernel? Kernel is basically a hub of the operating system. So you can call it as the manager or the brain of the OS. And its primary job is to allocate time, memory. It controls all the hardware and the resources that are there in the operating system. So basically anything you run on an OS is running on the kernel. And this is not just true for Unix. Any type of operating system like Windows, Mac OS, or even Android, they all have a kernel on which all the programs run. Um, the next part is the shell. The shell is basically an interface between the user and the kernel. So, say you want to open a file, then what you do is you write a command in the shell, and the shell in turn asks the kernel to execute that task. And the shell that we're talking about is basically a command line interpreter, meaning there is a command console where you write the commands that you want to execute, and then the shell asks the OS to execute that. Well, if you ask me, is this the only way to interact with the kernel? The answer is no. As you know, there is a GUI based operating system like Windows, and even Linux has a desktop. So, desktop is basically another type of interface which allows you to graphically interact with the kernel. Like, for example, here in the Windows OS, if I click this notepad button, it opens a notepad. What this means is this graphic user interface. When you click on this icon, it is telling the kernel that open this program, and the kernel in turn is launching that program. Um, so in this tutorial, we'll be primarily working on the shell, and we'll learn a lot of cool properties of the shell, a lot of commands. So let's fire up a shell. So here I have a shell opened, and this is basically my server that I'm running. Feel free to look up the previous videos where I talk about more on how to connect to a server or a Linux shell, um, and you will find that useful. So basically, this is a shell, and and in this black box you give in commands, and when you write in commands, it is telling the operating system to execute those commands. Now, say for example, in this shell, we are firing a command called ls, and you press tab. So if you continue to press tab, what it will do is it will try to guess or show you possibilities of all the commands starting with ls. So as you can see, there is a command called ls, as well as other commands like lscpu, which start with this two characters ls. Then there is lsmod, lslogins, and this is what you called auto completion. So as is written over here, that the shell has different features. One of these features is auto completion or file name completion. So here I showed you an example where the shell is helping you show the possibilities of other commands which start with ls. You can do the same thing for files. Say for example, in this folder I have this directory called pictures. So if I type in cd p and then just press in tab, so it autofills for you, and then you can go into the pictures folder. Let's try another example. So I am in the home directory. I fire an ls command. As you can see, I have all these folders and files, and say I want to go into the documents folder. So what I do is I type in cd and just press D and type in tab twice, one, two. So it shows me all the possibilities that I have. And there's a desktop. It starts with the capital D. There is documents and downloads. So say I press in O and then press tab again twice. So it will show two other possibilities, documents and downloads, because they start with DO. And then say I type in W and then press in tab, so it autofills. So auto completion autofill is very useful, and it helps us type in or write something fast. So this is a good, cool feature. Another feature of the shell is the history. So history basically is a record of all the commands that you have typed in into the shell. So you can just type in the history command, and what it does is it tells you what were the previous commands that you typed in. As you remember, we just typed in the cd command and then the pictures command, and these are recorded. So history is also a very good feature that is there in the shell.